Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Orlando Resort has gone on now for over 32 years at the time of this recording, and in those 32 years of fear, we have been given a plethora of original characters, all with their own interconnected storylines. Here is the full timeline of the lore of the Halloween Horror Nights icons. Beginning in ancient history, the demon known as Adaru manifests for the first time. Adaru is the physical embodiment of the feeling of fear. Later, a shape-shifting succubus appears when man first began taking chances. This succubus causes bad things to happen to whomever gambles with it and loses. The succubus would eventually be known as Lady Luck. She would go on to be present at every gamble humans make that end poorly. At some unknown point, Adaru becomes the caretaker of a pocket dimension that takes the form of an old lantern, inadvertently becoming trapped inside, requiring the aid of his 5 heralds to gather enough fear around every 5,000 years in the mortal world in order to release him from the lantern, though each of the heralds must first physically exist and possess individuals that represent each of them: chaos, death, sacrifice, legend, and vengeance. These figures would be represented in cave drawings as well as hieroglyphics and ancient texts throughout history around the globe. A festival known as Samhain began, which lifted the veil between the real world and the spiritual world, which then allowed witches and goblins to conjure a being known as the Pumpkin Lord, who gains its power from the celebration of the festival that would eventually evolve into the holiday known as Halloween. A mysterious emerald skull as of yet unknown origins, with the powers to twist and morph anything, was sealed inside a temple deep within a jungle that would become cursed due to the skull's influence. Throughout history, various legions of supernatural evils began to form around the globe. Eventually, these legions would be collectively known as the Legion of Horror, beginning with the Cerebins in 50,000 BC, comprised of animal-like beasts, the Mashtorans in 85,000 BC, featuring a group of murder-filled women prisoners, the Stregoi in 8000 BC, a group comprised of vampires, the Karazins in 6000 BC, a group of undead zombies, the Bacanoids in 1600 BC, featuring bloodthirsty warriors, and finally, the Morphins in 1428 AD, which comprised of various traditional ghosts and goblins. Each group in the Legion of Horror is identified by unique symbols and totems. In the late 1800s, John Jack Schmidt was born in Shady Brook Rest Home and Sanitarium with his brother Eddie. Jack and Eddie would grow up in an abusive household together. Later, a man known as Richmond Oddfellow began a traveling oddity circus seeking fame and wealth under the name Dr. Oddfellow. At one point, Oddfellow learned mystical abilities and gained knowledge that eternal life was possible, which sent him on a quest to obtain it. At some point in the 1800s, Shady Brook Rest Home closed and renovated itself to become an insane asylum. Sometime after, a group of killers known as the Body Collectors invaded Shady Brook and started killing off the staff and insane patients to turn them into artwork and tools. Some of them escaped and fled into the streets. On August 27, 1908, Mary Worthington, a schoolteacher in the small town of Cary, Ohio, died as a result of a Halloween prank orchestrated by the school handyman. 6 students were also involved in the death of their teacher. The schoolmaster found his schoolhouse in complete disarray, with blood and shards of glass scattered across the room. Although suspected murdered, Mrs. Worthington's body was never found and was classified as missing. On June 8, 1912, Universal Pictures was established. In the middle of the 1910s, during World War I, Meets was founded in America. In the 1920s, while searching for ways to bolster his mystic abilities and extend his life, Dr. Oddfellow ventured deep into a cursed jungle, known by superstitious locals as the Jungle of Doom. There he discovered an emerald skull in an ancient temple, which granted him powers over living souls, bending them to his will. Using the skull, he twisted the flora and the fauna of the jungle, turning them into his own horrid abominations. Oddfellow would then place the skull atop of a cane that he would then call the Cane of Souls. Around the same time, Universal Pictures would renovate an old opera house and convert it to a theater that would show motion pictures. This theater would open on October 19, 1922, and be known as the Universal Palace Theater. The Meats Company at this point was doing well, being the main food provider for establishments such as Dr. Oddfellow's Circus and the Universal Palace Theater. However, once the Great Depression struck, the business began losing money. The son of the original founder decided Meats livestock would secretly be changed. Instead of butchering pigs, the company would instead secretly butcher hobos, town lawbreakers, and unauthorized visitors to the factory into delicious meat. Not only did this keep the storehouses full, it helped keep the streets clean of vagrants, riffraff, and ne'er-do-wells. After the first couple humans were butchered, the new products became an instant success, and the company decided to keep the human livestock going. Years later, Meats would continue under the leadership of Samuel Meats, an overly friendly butcher who continues to provide high-quality meat made from human flesh up until the present day in Cary, Ohio. In the early 1930s, Lawrence, or Larry, Kurtzberg was an actor and Broadway performer who began his career at the Shubert Theater in the musical comedy Babes in Arms at age 17. Years later, he retired to the life of a taxidermist after his career ended. At some point in the mid to late 1930s, Jack Schmidt ran away from his abusive home to join Dr. Oddfellow's Traveling Oddities Circus, leaving his brother Eddie behind. While performing for Dr. Oddfellow, Schmidt would become a popular performer known as Jack the Clown. However, Jack was secretly a twisted murderer who has been murdering various carnival guests and hiding their bodies in a series of trunks in his traveling coach. At the same time, Dr. Oddfellow had some dark secrets of his own. While searching for more ways to grow his powers, he attempted to harness the power of the zodiac signs. In 1939, during the Dust Bowl, Dr. Oddfellow set up his carnival in a small Midwest town. There, he secretly mutilated some of his performers, turning their bodies into grotesque versions of the zodiac signs. By doing this, Dr. Oddfellow would successfully travel to the zodiac dimension, granting him immortality. Soon after, police officials and the FBI caught on to Schmidt's trail. On Halloween night of 1939, in fear of being captured, Jack revealed his murderous secret to Dr. Oddfellow, in hopes that he would conceal him. Instead, Oddfellow forced him to reveal what he had done to the bodies of the victims, leading him to Jack's traveling coach. Fearing the worst, Dr. Oddfellow murdered Jack, but not before Jack swiped at Oddfellow's eye, spilling a bit of his immortal blood into Jack's, and leaving behind a permanent scar on Oddfellow's face. He then hid the bodies of Jack and his victims within the traveling carnival's House of Horrors as part of an exhibit, stuffing Jack's body into a big wooden box. Soon after the incident and the law stopped investigating the circus, Oddfellow would continue his quest for more power. His Cane of Souls granted Oddfellow the ability to change his form, becoming different creatures. However, no matter what he turned into, he could always be identified by the scar Jack left on his face. In 1940, Julian Browning, an usher at the Universal Palace Theater, who hated anyone who rudely disrupted the movie-going experience for others, got into a fight with a rude movie patron who interrupted the presentation of The Phantom of the Opera. The patron tossed the usher's flashlight and it ripped through the screen. Browning had the patron kicked out of the theater and went to get his flashlight. However, he was caught in the sandbag dropline rope that was left over from the theater's time as an opera house, and he was lifted into the air and slowly strangled to death. In October of 1948, private investigator Boris Schuster, who offered investigation services in New York City with his brother Jake Schuster under the name of the Schuster Bros Private Investigations. Boris's involvement with the supernatural began when he discovered the Bacchanoid totem placed on his doorstep, and subsequently learned of the supernatural world and the legions of horror. This sent Boris to have multiple encounters with the various supernatural creatures and monsters. He would document his experiences in notes and novels he would write. Jake Schuster would later be killed in an incident involving a mysterious idol. Boris would rebrand Schuster Bros to Boris Schuster Private Investigations. Later in the 1940s, with his powers increasing and his collection of dark artifacts and monsters growing by the day, Dr. Oddfellow had shipped various creatures from either his worldly travels or twisted experimentations to his private San Francisco warehouse, Shipyard 32. Though, one of the monstrosities had managed to break free and caused havoc in the area, Oddfellow, instead of fixing the problem, decided to revel in the chaos and carnage they created, using his magic to disguise himself as one of the creatures, while still bearing his facial scar left by Jack, attacking anyone who entered the shipyard. At some point, a little girl known as Elsa Strict was visited by a winged creature who wanted to eat her, possibly a creature from Oddfellow Shipyard. In retaliation, the little girl overpowered and ate the creature herself, which led the girl to slowly slip into a sadistic madness that ended in the killing of her own mother. In 1955, Hollywood High School's homecoming parade was viciously attacked by a group of vampires. Only a few survived the ordeal. In 1957, Boris Schuster is attempting to retrieve the totems connected to the Legion of Horror from a police station, where the totems reside together and have opened a portal. He is successful and hides them in an attic in New Jersey. June 20th, 1958, Marie W. Agana, daughter of Mary Worthington, passed away. Her daughter, a psychiatrist named Mary Agana, inherited her grandmother's heirlooms, one of which was a jewelry music box that was possessed by an evil entity of her late grandmother. This entity slowly began possessing Dr. Agana. On June 25, 1958, after being denied funding by the Mental Health Association, Mary Agana opened up her own facility, Living Fearlessly, specialized treatments for fear-based ailments, to begin her controversial and immersive fear therapy program. She hired assistants from Shady Brook Asylum to participate in her studies. With each case, it became clearer that her sanity was waning as she tortured her patients with fear. However, her third patient, Charlie McPherson, was inadvertently killed during therapy. Her journal entries showed the excitement she felt over the patient's death. Due to McPherson's disappearance, private investigator Boris Schuster began an investigation into Dr. Agana and her clinic. Schuster made an appointment with Dr. Agana on August 27, 1958, to discover the truth. On this night, Dr. Agana was brutally murdered by one of her patients. Her death was the final step in Mary's transformation into the urban legend that would be known as Bloody Mary, a witch with immense powers trapped in a mirror world. At some point, Dr. Oddfellow sold the traveling carnival, and the various dark rides and exhibits were split and sent to various owners around the United States, including the House of Horrors, which still contained the wooden box hiding Jack's body, as well as the trunks of all of Jack's victims. In 1961, wanting to gain control of a legion of vampires, Dr. Oddfellow disguised himself as a vampire named Erlo Wolf in order to infiltrate a secret group of vampires. After learning about the homecoming incident in 1955, He made up a backstory in which he claimed to be a circus worker whose circus was attacked by vampires in 1938, causing him to turn into one himself. He successfully fooled the Vampire Council into believing that he was a vampire. In 1963, Boris Schuster founded The Legendary Truth, an investigation group that specifically deals with the paranormal, due to his encounter with the legions of horror, but primarily the incident involving Mary Agana. In 1968, Oddfellow, now part of the Vampire Council, stands up to fellow council member Olato, demanding that he lets the vampires go in a frenzy and feed on whomever they please without restraint. He did all of this in order to gain power and overthrow Olato. The rest of the council agreed. In 1969, Dr. Oddfellow would unleash the vampires in a small town in upstate New York during a music festival called Music Fest, causing mass destruction and chaos. During the madness, Dr. Oddfellow killed and sacrificed Olato and used his blood to increase his own power over the vampires. The powerful blood from Olato also would grow his mystical powers. In the 1970s, Lawrence, or Larry Kutzberg, tired of taxidermy, got desperate for more fame, so he turned to a talent agency at Cary, Ohio, to get a role in theater, television, and radio media once more. Later, he got this telephone message from a talent agent who turned out to be the shape-shifting succubus, Lady Luck. Larry took the offer, started working at the Channel 21 WKNB station, and within months, the Midnight Horror Show became one of the best horror variety shows at the time. Larry's character, H.R. Blood and Guts, became a household name. The show would present all kinds of horror movies, as H.R. Blood and Guts was the host of the show. Blood and Guts later began to host original horror/comedy episodes about holidays. At this point, Larry began to take the role of H.R. Blood and Guts too seriously, as he demanded to be referred to as such, and soon began to develop a violent mood swing. Only a year later, Larry's show ratings began to drop drastically, due to the holiday-themed horror episodes being too disturbing. This, along with the corresponding loss of the advertising revenue, was enough to make the producer John Reynolds write Larry a letter telling him that H.R. Blood and Guts show had to be canceled. In a demented rage, Larry kidnapped Reynolds and some of the TV crew members and horribly tortured them as he hosted and broadcasted his holiday-themed episodes for one last time. By the time police arrived to arrest Larry, Reynolds was suffering from mortal wounds. He died in the hospital he was placed in. The other members of the crew were released from the hospital, but they all quit their jobs at the WKNB station. Larry Kutzberg was placed in prison for life, showing no remorse for torturing the producer. Sometime in 1970s through the 1980s, Paulo Ravinsky was born in Eastern Europe. Growing up, he only wanted one thing: to be a filmmaker. He borrowed his father's camera often, but got in trouble for wasting film. He liked to film birds falling from trees that he shot with his BB gun. Sometime later, a once well-respected surgeon, Dr. Albert Kane, became the caretaker of Shady Oak Cemetery in Cary, Ohio. Dr. Kane, being intensely interested in the inner workings of the body, would lead him to perform morbid acts. Kane and his family eventually used the deceased of the town as guinea pigs in unnatural and bizarre experiments. His demented family dug up the bodies of the dead and even lured homeless people into their home to be used for Kane's experiments, either dead or alive. Word of what was going on quickly spread throughout the town, and the police arrested the Kane family. The investigation made headlines that shocked and mortified the nation. The local townspeople, mostly comprised of the relatives of the deceased used in the caretaker's experiments, took matters into their own hands, forming a mob and setting fire to the Victorian mansion and the whole area, with the Kane family still trapped inside. After the fire settled, a series of elaborate tunnels were discovered under the property. 1 year later, the ruins of the Kane funeral home were set to be demolished until the discovery of 3 unidentified decomposing bodies on the premises. Not long after, people who were last reported in the vicinity of the site began to go missing. Several research teams were sent to the cemetery to investigate reports of strange noises emanating from the ruin and the Shady Oak Cemetery. With 3 teams already gone missing, one mystery surrounding the Kane family is that of his daughter Cindy, who has been seen as an apparition haunting Cary, Ohio. In the fall of 1980, a television crew from the BBC was documenting the Great Dark Rides of America. They journeyed throughout the U.S. looking for forgotten carnival rides and attractions, and stumbled upon Oddfellow's House of Horrors as it sat abandoned in a Louisiana junkyard. The crew went inside to film the decaying attraction and stumbled upon a series of trunks. Behind the trunks was a large wooden box, stenciled with one letter filled on each side of the box, J-A-C-K. The crew investigated the box and found a large crank on the side and turned it. A clunky musical melody played out as the host turned it. The crank then rotated on its own until the top of the box flew open and a form sprung out. Affixed to a giant spring was the decomposing body of Jack Schmidt. After a thorough police investigation, the bodies of 13 missing children, as well as the body of Jack Schmidt, were shipped to the local Louisiana coroner's office for further examination. Around midnight on Halloween, the van carrying the body and the box of Jack disappeared into the Louisiana swamp in a freak accident. Later that week, the bodies of the BBC cameraman and host were found as the victims of a grisly and unsolved murder. Jack Schmidt was indeed alive after all this time, due to Oddfellow's immortal blood spilling into his own on that fateful night in 1939. Jack the Clown would quickly become an urban legend in the area and responsible for many disappearances. His main goal was to find Dr. Oddfellow so he can enact his revenge. On December 31st, 1984, in New York City, as the ball is about to drop to ring in the new year, the festivities take a turn for the worse, as a group of vampires who are now under the control of Dr. Oddfellow viciously attack the New Year celebration in a much similar way to the previous Homecoming and Music Fest incidents. Sometime in the mid to late 1980s, A.D. Schmidt, who was becoming a massive fan of 80s slashers and films featuring chainsaw-wielding maniacs, sets up a haunted house within the confines of the trailer park he's living in for Halloween. However, as a prank, a group of teenagers set fire to the haunted house while Eddie was still inside, severely burning his face and hands, and he would then don a mask and some light clown face paint as an homage to his brother Jack, whom he had heard rumors of still being alive. Some years later, Paul Vervinsky started developing movies, initially starting out as a snuff film director, capturing actual human suffering, torture, and death on his movie camera. His first project was a controversial feature known as The Widow's Eye. The film shocked so many of his country's population that he was forced out, which is when he came to America. The film industry didn't take his work seriously, and he was determined to change that. In June 1990, Universal Studios Florida would officially open. With the opening of the park, the ancient lantern containing the trapped entity of fear itself, Adaru, somehow found its way to the park's art and design department. Working through the lantern, fear influenced the park's creative team to create a yearly Halloween event that would terrify visitors in order to build up enough fear to prepare for his eventual return. In 1991, Universal Studios Florida would debut Fright Nights. Fear helped conjure up real mascots from popular films such as Beetlejuice and the Universal Monsters in order to bring as much visitors to the event as possible. The event only ran for 3 nights. In 1992, Fright Nights would be renamed to Halloween Horror Nights. By 1994, in an attempt to extract more fear from guests for Adaru to absorb, Halloween Horror Nights debuted scare zones throughout the park for the first time. The following year, Adaru needed more guests to attend the event, so he conjured the Crypt Keeper from the Tales of the Crypt to serve as the event icon, much like Beetlejuice and the classic monsters, back during Fright Nights. This time, the event ran for 12 nights. In 1996, the Crypt Keeper returned as the Icon, and the event now lasted for 15 nights and went until November. In 1999, Imhotep from the new film The Mummy was used as an icon as an attempt by Adaru to bring more guests to the event. However, his efforts were not extracting enough fear needed for his eventual arrival. His 5 heralds went to work and scoured the globe to find real-life horrors to bring to the event. In 2000, Universal Studios bought the old props from Oddfellow's old House of Horrors, including the box that Jack was trapped in for so many years. An unsuspecting Universal employee went to test the urban legend of the murderous clown who lives inside the spring box. Well, the employee did just that, and Jack was unleashed. Following his release, Jack unknowingly became possessed by one of Adaru's heralds representing chaos. Jack subsequently agreed to become the icon of Universal Studios Florida's Halloween Horror Nights 10. Before the start of the event, Jack eagerly roamed Orlando, Florida, scaring anyone and everyone in the area, while also persuading people to attend the event. Jack the Clown became massively popular, successfully giving Adaru an abundance of fear from that event. Adaru needed to plan the events for the following year, and he set his sights on Jack's very brother, Eddie Schmidt. Having heard of his brother's popularity in Orlando, Eddie traveled there to reunite with his brother. However, he quickly went under Adaru's control as he prepared him to be the next icon of Halloween Horror Nights, making up a story where Eddie was out for revenge. In 2001, due to the horrific events that took place just a month prior to the start of Halloween Horror Nights, Adaru believed he needed to tone down the violence of the event in order to bring enough people he needed. Adaru lessened the intensity of the event and commanded Jack the Clown to become the icon once again instead of Eddie. In 2002, Adaru chose to host Horror Nights at Universal Orlando's second theme park, Islands of Adventure. Fear himself used his herald representing death to possess Dr. Albert Kane to become the icon of the event, known to the park guests as the Caretaker. In 2003, Adaru once again held Horror Nights at Islands of Adventure, and this time, his herald representing sacrifice needed to find a host. Paolo Ravinsky was hired by Universal Orlando to film his newest horror film at Islands of Adventure during Halloween Horror Nights. Here, he turned each area of the park into a living horror movie as part of his dream project. Adaru's herald would go on to possess Paolo, and he would be known at the event as the Director. This experience made Paolo realize that reality filmmaking is the new way to make his mark by pushing the boundaries of filmmaking and proving his critics wrong. His actors unwillingly sacrifice everything to become a piece of filmmaking history. He films the reactions to a variety of deadly situations. He also hosted his own torture show where he would subject victims from the audience to horrors on stage and film their reactions. In 2004, Adaru would choose not to feature an icon for that year's event, possibly to have more time to find the right person. In 2005, his herald representing legend possessed the now old but still sadistic woman, Elsa Strict. Adaru would use her as the icon for Halloween Horror Nights 15, becoming known as the Storyteller. She was given the power to speak her stories into reality at the event. She first transported guests into the landscape of her newest story called Terra Currentis. The land was ruled over by the evil Terra Queen. The Terra Queen was cruel and heartless. She would oversee the execution of her victims to refill blood vats. This blood was used to create a ceremonial dagger called the Terra Throne Blade, and it was used on the nightly sacrificial ceremonies. On the last night, the queen herself was sacrificed. Before her death, she promised to be resurrected 15 years later. In 2006, the director was hired by Universal Studios Hollywood to create the ultimate horror movie. Before they allowed production to begin, Universal requested that he submit a short film detailing his project to preview it for executives. However, when Universal viewed the graphic short film, they had the project canceled for good and banned Paolo from ever stepping foot into Universal Studios again. but Paulo, in fact, secretly took up residence in an abandoned backlot set at the park, vowing to get revenge on Universal. Aware that he was hiding on the backlot, Universal still allowed their Halloween event to run in 2006, but warned visitors that Paulo was incredibly dangerous. Adaru was not pleased that the director was in Hollywood, as he needed Paulo in Orlando to celebrate the Sweet 16 of the event. Adaru quickly called Paulo back to Orlando. In preparation for the event, Adaru brought the Lord of Darkness into reality to bring together all the previous icons. The Lord of Darkness was responsible for the resurrection of the Caretaker and others, as well as turning Jack mortal. The 16th HHN event would then begin with Jack, the Caretaker, the Director, and the Storyteller, all present. During the event, Jack the Clown was soon caught by the authorities and committed to the place of his birth, Shady Brook, which has now become an asylum. Though typically isolated in the maximum security ward, Jack's mere presence seemed to have an adverse effect on the unstable population, who started emulating the clown. Eventually, the inmates started a mass riot, gruesomely tortured the hospital staff, and put Jack in charge of the facility. During the chaos, Jack found records that his former boss and murderer, Dr. Oddfellow, was still alive, running a small traveling carnival. He left Shady Brook in search of Oddfellow. Early in 2007, traveling to Dr. Oddfellow's Dark Carnival and Emporium in the dark of night, Jack the Clown stalked the tents and took his long overdue vengeance on his former master, supposedly killing Dr. Oddfellow. When he emerged, he dressed himself in Oddfellow's bright red coat and boots. He completed his look with Dr. Oddfellow's prized possession, the Cane of Souls. What Jack didn't know was instead of dying, Dr. Oddfellow instead was sent into the Zodiac realm, where he would remain trapped. Jack went off to spend the next few months traveling the world to find the right sideshow acts for his deadly Carnival of Carnage. He gathered a plethora of monsters, mutants, madmen, and maniacs, luring them with the promises of fame, fortune, and plenty of fresh victims. One of the maniacs Jack recruited was a twisted circus woman who had been performing for Dr. Oddfellow for some years, known as Chance. After nearly a year of preparation, Ringmaster Jack brought his Carnival of Carnage to Halloween Horror Nights 17. Due to Shady Brook's recent riot the year prior caused by Jack, the inmates now planned more riots to escape the facility. On Christmas Eve 2007, an entire bus of inmates escaped. Over 25 people were killed by the madmen. In 2008, Legendary Truth, The Collective, began an investigation on the unsolved disappearance of Mary Agana. As the tale of Bloody Mary started gaining mainstream attention and new reports of disappearance associated with it, The Collective worried she may be making a resurgence. Collective field operatives collected information and visited Dr. Agana's office, which was still in utter disarray since her brutal death. At 11:03 p.m. on August 27, 2008, a manifestation of Bloody Mary was detected by the field agents, and they vanished. Somehow, with the aid of Mary's court of powerful witches that she gathered over the years from the manifestations made at HHN, consisting of the Evil Queen, Samhain, the Wicked Witch of the West, and the former workers from Gorewood Forest, they used Universal Studios Florida to create a portal into Mary's mirrored world, creating their own version of the park's Halloween Horror Nights event. Mary possessed Universal itself to advertise her image and of her minions to enchant visitors to attend her own Halloween event inside the mirror, comprising of the 5 realms: fears, tales, urban legends, nightmares, and myths, all so Mary can become more powerful. This event was not planned by Adaru. Calvin Thorncastle, CEO of Legendary Truth The Collective, uncaring of the potential casualties, quickly dispatched new operatives into Mary Agana's world to collect additional information on the Doctor and her relationship to Bloody Mary, as well as the 7 patients that fell victim to her treatments. The case was also crowdsourced online to scour the internet for as much clues and fragmentary information as possible. Eventually, Mary's Horror Nights event was stopped by the collective, and possibly Adaru, and she disappeared without a trace. Quickly attempting to regain control of his event, Adaru began planning the next year's event, resurrecting a long-dead usher from the Universal Palace Theater in the 1940s, Julian Browning, to become the herald for vengeance and become the next newest icon. In 2009, the usher hosted Halloween Horror Nights 19, ripped from the silver screen, where the undead usher would unleash horror film characters on the attendees of the event, such as the Wolfman, Billy the Puppet, and Chucky. Julian Browning became a new fan favorite icon as he ushered many guests into the event. This year was a massive success for Adaru as he finally had enough fear harvested for his return. Shady Brook Asylum eventually shut down due to its security record. Rumors said that the abandoned building is haunted. In 2010, the legendary Truth Awakening team investigated the rundown hospital. Apparitions caught on tape were sent to be analyzed by the collective. Just 1 year before the closing of Shady Brook, a prisoner named Floyd Mercer hung himself and left behind a notebook full of quotes about luck. It turns out he was the only known person to ever gamble with Lady Luck and survive. Floyd witnessed one of his friends, Benny, play poker with Lady Luck by his side, and he won. Later, Floyd saw Benny being killed by Lady Luck in her true monstrous form, and her minions. These minions were her past victims turned into monsters with spade-shaped scars. He escaped when he saw him. He faked being crazy to get into the asylum and stay alive. Eventually, he realized Lady Luck found out where he was, and he hung himself. Early in 2010, around 20 photographs of previous Halloween Horror Nights were discovered, with strange burn marks forming a bizarre pattern. The legendary Truth analyzed the photos and discovered that they were each a piece of a puzzle depicting a symbol. Assembling the puzzle at around 9 p.m. on August 24th, the Art and Design building at Universal Orlando suffered a blackout, as the demon inside was unleashed. Soon after his release from the lantern, fear began to manifest himself over various electronic media in the months leading up to Halloween Horror Nights. The first evidence of this was in a soundbite from a security camera in the Universal Art and Design building during the blackout. At first, the noise sounded like a voice speaking gibberish, but when played backward, an ethereal, gravely voice could be heard speaking a message.
19 years, 19 cycles. What has been decades for some has been eons for me. On the 20th cycle, I shall be revealed.
On September 16th of that same year, during the filming of the production Die Rise in the Haunted House, Horror Nights of the Hallowed Past, Art and Design team member Heather Summers was possessed by fear, demanding that all those watching come to the event so that he could feed on their terror. Fear claimed that he is inside everyone, and that soon they would all bear his mark, holding up a red-hot branding iron with an XX branded as he said this. Soon after, videos began appearing on the Halloween Horror Nights website, where Fear began speaking through the previous icons, his 5 heralds: Jack the Clown, representing chaos; the Caretaker, death; the Director, sacrifice; the Storyteller, legend; and the Usher, vengeance. They claimed that the previous 19 years were only the beginning, and that a new era of darkness would soon arrive. On September 24th, Halloween Horror Nights 20 Years of Fear began, and Fear revealed himself in all his terrifying glory. After the event, the lantern's light went out, and Fear was forced to retreat to his prison, where he waits patiently to be released again. The legendary Truth played a major hand in stopping Adaru before he conquered all. It is rumored that Fear, despite being trapped, is still manipulating Universal Studios staff members by making them design more creatures in haunted houses for scare zones and future events. In 2011, with Adaru back inside the lantern, he indeed did continue to influence the event, though now not being as involved as he has been the previous 20 years. For Halloween Horror Nights 21, a new icon was needed, And that's when the shape-shifting ancient succubus appeared in Orlando and took over the event. She invited as many guests as possible to the event to take a gamble with her. Lady Luck is a beautiful, seductive, and mysterious woman, but the more chances you take, she slowly morphs into her true form, a twisted monster. She was found taking various forms in each haunted house that year, claiming many victims. In 2012, HHN 22 took place with no icon. However, the guests were not safe from the supernatural horror that would take over the event instead. With a ripping, clawing, and tearing through the concrete beneath Universal Studios came ancient cemetery structures. From these structures, the patrons of death, known as the Iniquitous, summoned the ancient legions of horror onto the guests at Halloween Horror Nights. Nowhere in the park was safe, as the various Legion members would prey and attack the guests anywhere in the park, including inside gift shops and restaurants. It is believed that the legendary Truth was able to banish away the Legion of Horror from the park at the end of the event, thanks to the writings of Boris Schuster. Halloween Horror Nights would continue its annual Halloween event the next 2 years without any interference from any supernatural evil acting as an icon or taking over the event. HHN 23 and 24 would feature various IP-based haunted houses and scare zones such as The Walking Dead. In 2015, on the 25th anniversary, Jack would return once again to HHN, seemingly drunk with power. After believing he killed Dr. Oddfellow back in 2007, Jack decided he wanted his spotlight back from his other former master, Adaru, or Fear himself, and successfully created a sort of cult around himself, which he called Jack's Maniacs. With his ego in full swing, he committed himself to proving he was better than Fear, believing himself to be Horror Nights incarnate. He decided to prove his supremacy to everyone by expanding and improving on his Carnival of Carnage at Halloween Horror Nights, making it more terrifying than ever with his new partner in crime, Chance. Together, they both caused utter chaos throughout the event. At the conclusion of the event, Jack and Chance were detained by authorities, with Jack sealed back inside his box and Chance being committed to the newly reopened Shady Brook Asylum. In 2016, while she was incarcerated, Chance entered her theater of the mind, which meant whatever nightmares occurred in her mind would soon become a horrific reality, and she became the host of Halloween Horror Nights 26. During the event, we learned she resented playing second fiddle to Jack and prefers to be the complete center of attention. Theories suspect that Adaru had a hand in conjuring Chance's twisted thoughts into reality at the event. It is believed Adaru took her out of Shady Brook after HHN 26 and locked her inside the lantern. In 2017, HHN once again would return as normal. However, in the Hollywood section of the theme park, the Festival of the Deadliest was held. Bone would go on to take over the marketing of the event to call in all Horror Nights fans to attend the event so he and his minions can feast on their souls. This year also featured the first appearance of a soon-to-be fan-favorite decoration in the Trick or Treat Scare Zone. Halloween Horror Nights would continue as normal the next 2 years, once again without major influence from supernatural forces. HHN 28 and 29 would focus on popular IPs such as Stranger Things, Ghostbusters, and Killer Clowns from Outer Space. In 2020, HHN 30 was meant to celebrate 30 years of the event. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Halloween Horror Nights was canceled, though 2 haunted houses planned for the event opened to daytime guests that year. In 2021, Halloween Horror Nights would return in full force to celebrate 30 years of Fear. With the return of the event, all the previous icons returned to celebrate, most notably Jack the Clown, who was seen reunited with his brother, Eddie Schmidt. Chance was also seen by Jack's side. This event also allowed guests access into the Lantern Realm underneath the park, ushered into the lantern by Adaru himself. we enter the Lantern to witness all the previous HHN icons battling each other for supremacy inside the Lantern. We learn that Bloody Mary has her own mirror dimension within the Lantern realm, though she did not make an appearance at the event. During HHN 30, one haunted house included the summoning of the Pumpkin Lord, who grew in tremendous power throughout the event run due to the guest celebration of Halloween. Wicked Growth Realm of the Pumpkin went off to win House of the Year as the Pumpkin Lord quickly became a fan favorite. This haunted house also featured the popular decoration used in 2017 in the Trick or Treat Scare Zone that guests would go on to name Little Boo, with many visiting the haunted house just to see the little pumpkin, which in turn grew the Pumpkin Lord's power. In 2022, with the event being on its 31st year, the same number that Halloween falls on in the month of October, the ancient ghouls and goblins of Samhain took over the event and summoned the Pumpkin Lord once again inside the park to act as the main icon of HHN 31. With all the power and popularity gained in the previous year, the Pumpkin Lord was present every single event night, ushering guests into the event to celebrate and grow Halloween so he can grow in power again, even going as far as to manipulate the merchandise team of the park to create Little Boo merchandise to help bring more and more guests to the event. The Pumpkin Lord spread his vines throughout the entire park as well as into the Cabana Bay Hotel, which, despite not being physically present at the event the following year, his followers still set up a bar themed to the Pumpkin Lord inside the hotel, which features a book with the incantation to summon the Pumpkin Lord again. In 2023, 16 years after first being trapped inside the Zodiac dimension, Dr. Oddfellow was able to finally escape, due in part to the powers he gained from killing Olato in the 60s. Oddfellow was greatly weakened during his banishment, and needed to quickly find a way to replenish his strength. He would reclaim his Cane of Souls and announce to the world that he would offer anyone immortality. At Universal's Halloween Horror Nights 32, he would show park guests images of fear and terror, which would break their connections to the mortal world. Oddfellow offered all guests of HHN a chance of immortality and to serve him. However, this promise is only a trick, as he intends to steal the souls of all his new followers to regain his full power and strength he once had. As of now, that's where the timeline ends. With Dr. Oddfellow back in the mortal world and influencing Halloween Horror Nights, there's no doubt that Jack the Clown has taken notice of this and is on his way to settle the score once again with his former boss. What will happen next in the story of Halloween Horror Nights? Only time will tell.